Radio 2 stars stunned as Scott Mills' sacking leaks live. Imagine showing up to work, mic in hand, coffee still hot, ready to spin some tunes for millions of listeners, and then finding out, mid-broadcast, that the whole world already knows your job is gone. Not from your boss, not from HR, from the internet. Yeah, that's the kind of chaos we're unpacking today, and trust me, you are not ready for how messy this actually got. Welcome back to Celebrity Watch Gist, where the tea is always piping hot and nobody is safe. Quick favor before we dive in. If you're loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Thanks. If you did that, you are officially one of the good ones. Now back to the show. So let's set the scene. BBC Radio 2. For those of you in America who aren't fully clued in, think of BBC Radio 2 as the British version of a mega station. Imagine if iHeartRadio, NPR, and your favorite morning zoo show had a very proper, very British baby. It has tens of millions of listeners. It is a cultural institution. Getting a slot on Radio 2 is not just a job, it is a throne. And Scott Mills, he had one of those thrones. Had, past tense. And the way it all came crashing down? Absolutely cinematic. Scott Mills has been a radio personality in the UK for decades. The man is practically a fixture, like Big Ben, but with better playlists. He spent years at BBC Radio 1, building a massive fan base, becoming one of the most recognizable voices on British airwaves. Then he made the jump to Radio 2, which in the UK radio world is essentially a promotion. You move to Radio 2 when you've graduated from the youth crowd and you're ready for the big leagues, the established, loyal, massive audience that tunes in religiously. It was a big deal. It was a career milestone. It was supposed to be the beginning of a golden era. And then, boom, the leak heard around the industry. Now here's where this story shifts from interesting to absolutely unhinged. Reports began swirling that Scott Mills was being let go from Radio 2, and these reports didn't quietly trickle out in some late-night blog post. They exploded on social media, in entertainment news, across the British press. The timing? Catastrophically public, the kind of timing that makes PR professionals age 10 years in real time. Word got out before the official announcement, before any polished statement, before anybody had a chance to do any damage control whatsoever. Let's talk about what that means for a second. Because in broadcasting, the way you leave matters almost as much as how you arrived. A graceful exit, a farewell show, a heartfelt goodbye, listeners calling in with their favorite memories, that's the gold standard. That's how legends leave. What doesn't make the highlight reel? Having your exit leaked like a classified document while you're still technically employed. That's not a farewell. That's a fumble. And the colleagues, the fellow Radio 2 stars, reportedly stunned. Because in environments like this, tight-knit, long-running broadcast teams, you develop a real camaraderie. These are people who share studios, share inside jokes, share the weird, intimate experience of talking to millions of strangers every single day. When news like this leaks without warning, it doesn't just affect the person at the center of the story. It sends a shockwave through the entire team. Suddenly, everyone is looking at each other like, wait, did you know? How did this get out? Are we all okay? That energy in the studio when something this big leaks live, you cannot manufacture that kind of tension. Hollywood writers would charge extra for it. Now, let's zoom out, because context here is everything. The BBC has been going through significant changes across its entire portfolio. Budget pressures, shifting audience habits, the streaming revolution eating into traditional radio listenership. It's a whole thing. Executives have been making tough calls, renegotiating contracts, reshuffling lineups. Radio 2 in particular has seen its share of shakeups over the past couple of years, with big names either leaving, being moved around, or having their hours adjusted. It is a landscape in motion. So when Scott Mills' situation leaked, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in the middle of an already turbulent period for British broadcasting. Which means the audience reaction wasn't just about Scott Mills, it was about everything. Fans weren't just upset about one DJ, they were processing a larger grief, the slow, grinding transformation of something they loved. Scott Mills became the face of that frustration, whether he wanted to be or not. And look, let's be real for a second, because Celebrity Watch just doesn't do sugarcoating. The BBC has had a complicated relationship with its talent over the years. There have been controversies, overpayments that made headlines, pay disparity debates, and let's not forget the very loud, very public conversations about whether the corporation handles its departures with any kind of grace at all. The Scott Mills situation, if the leaks are accurate, feels like another chapter in that complicated story. When your exit leaks before you've even had a chance to process it yourself, that's an institutional problem, not just bad luck. But here's the twist. And oh, there's always a twist on this channel. Scott Mills is not exactly the type to go quietly. The man has survived the brutal, ever-changing landscape of British radio for decades. He has outlasted format changes, audience shifts, platform evolutions, and entire generations of radio competition. He went from Radio 1 to Radio 2 and built a following both times. That is not an accident. That is skill. That is resilience. That is someone who genuinely understands how to connect with an audience, and that skill does not evaporate just because one door closes. Which brings us to the real conversation this whole mess is sparking. What does the future of radio actually look like? Because here's the thing. In America, we've been watching traditional radio struggle against Spotify, Apple Music, podcasts, and every other audio format fighting for our ear time. The UK is navigating the exact same storm. And the question isn't just, what happens to Scott Mills? It's, what happens to the art form he spent his life mastering? That's a bigger question, and it deserves to be asked out loud. Because radio at its best is not just music delivery, it is personality, it is companionship. It is the voice that gets you through your morning commute, your late-night drive, your lazy Sunday morning when you don't want to think too hard but you still want to feel something. The people who do that well, who make you feel like they're talking directly to you even though they're broadcasting to 10 million people, those people are rare. Scott Mills is one of them. And institutions that let those people walk out the door without so much as a dignified goodbye are making a mistake they'll feel for years. Now, the official response from the BBC at the time of this story was, as is the BBC's signature style, extremely measured, very professional, very we don't comment on individual contracts. Which, translated from corporate English to human English, means, yes, something is happening. No, we are not going to tell you about it in a way that gives you any satisfaction whatsoever. Classic BBC energy. You almost have to respect the restraint. Almost. Meanwhile, the fans were not measured. Not even a little bit. Social media lit up like a switchboard. Hashtags, petitions, long emotional threads about what Scott Mills's shows meant to people. Listeners sharing memories of specific broadcasts, specific moments where his voice was the backdrop to something important in their lives. That kind of response doesn't happen for someone who was just doing a job. That happens for someone who genuinely connected. And connection, my friends, is currency that outlasts any contract. So where does this all land? Scott Mills, one of British radio's most durable and beloved voices, exits Radio 2 in the messiest way possible. Not with a parade, but with a leak, with confusion, with colleagues reportedly caught off guard, and fans scrambling to make sense of it all. The BBC gets another entry in its increasingly long file of exits that could have been handled better. And the broader conversation about what radio is, what it means, and who deserves to be on it, that conversation just got a lot louder. This is bigger than one DJ and one station. This is about what we value in media, how we treat the people who build our cultural institutions, and whether the organizations in charge of those institutions are actually equipped to handle the human side of the business. Spoiler alert, based on the evidence, that's still very much a work in progress. What do you think? Did the BBC drop the ball here? Is Scott Mills better off moving on to something new? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and some of you write comments so good they deserve their own channels, honestly. And if this video had you hooked from the first sentence, share it. Send it to someone who loves a good media scandal. Because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind us that behind every headline, there's a real person whose career just became everyone's conversation. Thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means everything.